Hey, Wayne Fox. I decided today it was about time I did the first video of this type that I've ever done. I just got this new box delivered and I've never done an unboxing video. Now I realize that several thousand people have already done an unboxing video of this particular item. And the point of the video is really not about the unboxing, but I decided what the heck. So let's tear into this thing. I've been using a MacBook Pro as my only workstation for, since last July. And sure enough, there it is. Imagine that. It looks exactly like the one I got 9 months ago. But I wanted to quit using a Mac Pro because I got tired of, flipping files back and forth and trying to know what was on each one. And the 6-core MacBook Pro was pretty appealing. When they first came out with it, it had a real bad reputation. All this thing that's called thermal throttling. All right, let's get this baby open here. And it looks like they haven't changed anything. What do you know? There it is. Ta-da! This looks like it's the same. In fact, I'm going to be real careful because I'm going to put my old MacBook Pro in this so I can make it look nice and new when I sell it. So the whole issue I have with the thermal throttling quote fiasco is, let's understand one thing. I'm not an engineer here, but all CPUs thermal throttle. That's part of the way they're built. They're designed, if they get hot, they'll cool off. They don't run at a set clock speed anymore. All of the CPUs now have a rated clock speed, but they all can run substantially faster. And the better the cooling you provide, the more often they can run at those higher speeds. So initially, the Apple MacBook Pro in 2018 with the 6 cores, which is what I bought, had a little bit of an issue, is that the throttling was a little too aggressive. And the fans would speed up and slow down and speed up and slow down and get noisy and a lot of stuff. Now, Apple sent a firmware update out really, really quick. And despite the fact that that whole issue really went away, I haven't had any problems with it at all. People keep bringing it up and claiming. Now, every computer does it. Windows computers do as well. Some of them are bigger, so they have a little more air, so maybe they can run a little better. But the bottom line is, the real issue is with thermal throttling is it hurting what you're trying to do? So in this video, what I'm going to do is I'm going to set up my new 8-core, 2.3 gigahertz, 32 gigs of RAM MacBook Pro, identical to my 2016. What I really want to watch is when I do some real world tests. I'm not talking about Cinebench or all this stuff. I'm talking about what photographers do, such as making 1,000 or 100 one-to-one previews in Lightroom, or running, there's a pretty good benchmark out there which really stresses everything with Photoshop. I want to see, first of all, if this one's faster, because that's why I bought it. But second, the thermal throttling thing. Now, what I've seen from all the videos I've watched online, throttling, but it's still running higher than the rated speed. What we really want to see is, in real world tests, what kind of CPU speed is it able to maintain? And that's kind of what I want to compare. Now, I'm not an engineer, I'm not a scientist, but the bottom line is, how does Lightroom do? How does Photoshop do? How does Capture One do? That's what I'm interested in. Without those tests, what do you know? So I'm going to load it all up. They're going to be identical. I'm going to run a whole bunch of tests. And then in a week or so, I'll be back and I'll just show you some side-by-sides. So let's see what we got.
So on each computer, I've created 2 brand new Lightroom catalog files. The one on the left is the 2019 and the one on the right is the 2018. 2018 is a 6-core 2.9 gigahertz. The 2019 is a 2.3 gigahertz 8-core. I have ScreenFlow running in the background on both computers, capturing the entire screen. I did a test without ScreenFlow, and I found that it didn't really affect it too much. The test consists of importing 76 Fuji 50 megapixel GFX files and 28 Sony A7R III 42 megapixel files, as well as generating one-to-one previews of each of those files on import. The files are on an SD card and a good card reader and being transferred and copied to the internal SSD of both computers. The way I've done the video is I've actually normalized it so it will take the same amount of time to show the import, but the clock on the right will let you know where they are as far as actual time, and the one on the right will definitely take longer, as you'll see the time change. The reason I did that is because then I can scroll through the video and compare similar tasks at similar times. Rather than play it, I'm just going to start scrolling through. So right here we have the very beginning of the task. You'll see that at the beginning both are running pretty cool and they both climb pretty quickly. The 2019, as the task starts, runs at almost 4 gigahertz, well above it. And the 2018 is running more in the 3.5 gigahertz range. The thing that I found interesting as the test goes on, if you see the green in the middle, this is the CPU history, as well as the blue bars at the bottom, which is the current CPU usage. And this particular task, Lightroom seems to be pretty good at multitasking or multi-threading, I guess it's called. It's really utilizing the cores and the virtual cores almost to their max. All the green in there is the CPU usage. The little red at the bottom is the amount of CPU that the system's actually using. But as we move along, you'll see that the 2019 maintains right around 3.0 gigahertz as up, and if you watch the it can go as high as 3.4, and the 2018 is also hovering right around 3 gigahertz or slightly above it. Of course, the difference is the 2018, it's rated at 2.9 gigahertz. On the 2019, the gray line is its rated clock speed, and on the 2018, you can see the gray line, it's barely hidden by the blue. So neither of the two CPUs are throttling, if throttling means going slower than the rated clock speed. The fans you can see are cranking pretty high. That's the red bars at the bottom. They're almost at full RPM. If we look at the temperature, you'll see that the 2019 is actually running slightly cooler. It is more up and down, but it's holding at slightly cooler temperatures overall. And both computers are able to maintain above their rated clock speed. And the 2019, it can maintain significantly above its clock speed. When it drops off at the end, that's simply because the task is over, and you'll notice it cools down pretty quickly. And a lot of times when if you see the clock speed below the rated speed, that's just because there isn't any task that the computer needs to do. The 2019 MacBook Pro was 38 seconds faster in this test, which computes to about a 15% gain in speed. Obviously, the mileage of any speed increase varies based on the task and the efficiency of the software, but it's not insignificant, so it might be something worth considering if you're looking for the maximum you can get out of a MacBook Pro. For the next test, I exported all of those files I just imported. I exported them all as a full-size JPEG, and I've done the same thing. I've normalized the test, and so we're going to scroll through it. And as you can see, it's pretty similar. The interesting part is how the heat on the 2019 much more gradual, and it just seems to be more spiky. No clue what that's about. Again, notice that both computers maintained above their rated clock speed, so neither are throttling, even though the fans are pretty much maxed out. The one thing I will say that I think some of the differences are, first of all, understand that the 2019 is a Gen 9 i9 processor. The 2018 is a Gen 8 i9 processor. And I don't know a lot of the differences, but I'm sure there were some improvements, and one of those might be in generating maybe slightly less heat. And even though they're rating the chips at a slower speed, they know they can be maintained overclocking without too much trouble, depending on the cooling. In the bottom, you'll see that the fans are almost maxed out. There is one fairly significant difference in the cooling as well. In the 2019 MacBook Pro, the left fan is capable of running at 6,000 RPM. I kind of cut that off. And on the 2018 MacBook Pro, the left fan maxes out at around 5,500 RPM. So the 2019 MacBook Pro is actually moving a slight amount more of air, which is probably helping a little bit with the thermal properties. I also, from some videos I watched online and some people that have actually tore these things apart, Go figure. I've never been willing to drop all this money in a computer and rip it open, but that's what these guys do. Anyway, the Apple used a different thermal paste to affix the heat sink to the CPU, and the paste is a better consistency and more efficient. So it's transferring the heat out a little better. So between those three factors, I think is one reason that the 2019 can consistently run overclocked by how much it is. Like I said, it almost always runs at about the same speed as the other one, even though it's only rated at 2.3 gigahertz. If we go ahead and run this test to the end, you'll see that the 2019 MacBook Pro performed the test about 30 seconds faster, which is even a little bit better than the 15% we had on the other one. So we're as far as Lightroom, we're seeing a 15% gain in some of the heavier tasks. Again, notice the ability of both computers to heavily leverage all of the cores and max out the cores in the computer. So the last test is a Photoshop test created by a company called Puget Systems. And these guys build high-end computers for graphics work. The test itself is meant to really stress Photoshop. It takes almost 25 minutes for this test to run. Again, I've done the same thing. I've normalized it so the clock will let you know how they're doing. The tests themselves they'll be doing similar tasks at the same time, which will be interesting as we scroll back and compare some things. Right now, both of computers are running pretty cool. They've set for a few minutes, so they're both below 60 degrees. And there's not a lot of CPU activity going on, so both processors are running pretty well below their rated speed. As soon as we start the test, you'll see that things move along pretty quickly. Right away, you'll notice that both computers are able to turbo clock all the way up to 4 gigahertz, and the 2019 is even up at 4.25 gigahertz. The one thing to watch as this goes up and down is whenever you see the computer running at around the 4 gigahertz range, you'll also notice that it's probably only able to use one of the cores. There's a lot of tasks that Photoshop cannot use multiple cores for, and in that case, both computers perform almost identically. I actually looked at some of the actual tests and timed the beginning to the end, and if they're only using one core, they're both running at about 4 gigahertz, and Photoshop takes about the same amount of time. As soon as you get into multiple cores, then all of a sudden the 2019 starts to have a little bit of an advantage. Let's just keep scrolling through the test now. So right now we're able to run a lot of cores. You'll see both of them are really green. And as long as we're running a lot of cores, they're actually sitting right around the 3 gigahertz range. As soon as we get to some of these other tests, it's going to be a little higher than that because the core usage isn't as good. We're using number one more than the others. And you'll notice they're both pretty up and down, but both are able to maintain. As soon as we get to an area where you can only use one core, then they're going to both of them jump up to nearly 4 gigahertz. And as soon as you hit multiple cores, suddenly they drop down. So you notice that the blue bars at the bottom, if there's a lot of blue bars, the clock speed drops down on both machines to around 3 gigahertz. And as soon as there's, the bars drop, especially when the left bar is higher, you see that they're floating up around 4 gigahertz. Now, one thing I noticed here, which is interesting, is there is this point in time, you can see the 2018 fans are pretty maxed out on both machines, and the 2018 did throttle down below its rated clock speed. I found it puzzling because it cooled down well below the 100-degree kind of limit that seems to be on the CPU, and even though it cooled way down, it didn't speed it back up right away. And so I don't know if that's a function of the filter that was running at the time, but then it shortly goes back up. You'll notice that the 2019 really never drops below its rated clock speed through Photoshop. It's running nearly 4 gigahertz anywhere where it's a single core and about 3 gigahertz when it's multi-core. If we scroll all the way to the end of the test, move along. What's interesting about this is I can actually see what test is running, and I can decide I can kind of tell if Photoshop can use multi-cores for that particular task, and the ones that it can't. So it's kind of interesting to watch. I might spend some more time researching that just for the heck of it. Anyway, once we get down to the end of the test, the 2019 MacBook Pro did the test about 88 seconds faster, and that comes out to about 7%. Not surprising because a lot of the tasks are single core, and for those tasks, the machines work at about the same speed. They're both running at about 4 gigahertz, not a big advantage. The interesting thing here is the GPU score, 49 to 53 difference. So the Pro Vega 20 GPU, I don't believe Photoshop is really taking advantage of that either, because on some things I've done, I actually did try my online video game World of Warcraft for just a few minutes because I know it really stresses the GPU, and it definitely was significant as far as the 2019. Unfortunately, Photoshop isn't leveraging it as well. I don't know if that's a function of the software because of what they're doing. They can't leverage it, or if it's just, it is old software and Adobe's been trying to improve it all the time, and maybe over time it'll even get better using multiple cores as well as GPUs. The reference system for Puget Sounds is rated at 1000, so their top-end system, that's what they said at the reference, and that's 1000. That's a full-blown desktop system with advanced cooling and all the bells and whistles to max out the speed. As you can see, the 2019 MacBook Pro scored 806 as compared to the 2018, which scored 733, so almost a 10% difference in the two, and not bad for a portable computer. To give you a couple of ideas, the 12-core current Mac Pro, this is June of 2019 for those listening down the road a year or two. The current 12-core Mac Pro only gets a score of about 660, I believe. The current king of Apple hardware in this gets a score of 919, and that's the 14-core iMac Pro. Pretty pricey machine. It'll be interesting to see how well the new Mac Pro that was just announced does. For me, I don't believe it's going to be worth the investment because I'm actually pretty happy with the performance, and now I know why, because I had the old Mac Pro, and my laptops are both performing faster than the Mac Pro did. Well, that's enough of that. I enjoyed testing a little bit, but that's about as much as I can stand. Hopefully you made it through the video. The one thing I might conclude is that it's pretty apparent that the MacBook Pro isn't throttling or isn't thermal throttling as some suspected, and even the 2018 one, the original one that came out, that's been accused of all the thermal throttling, I really couldn't get it to throttle doing typical tests. I ran a bunch of other tests too. I ran some Cinebench, and I ran some other things. I ran a Capture One test and ScreenFlow tests, and even a Final Cut Pro test. Now, I don't have any real complicated Final Cut Pro stuff. I don't have 18 tracks stacked on each other or anything and trying to render it out. But I really couldn't stress the processors any worse than I did in these other two tests. I also ran a longer import. I ran the one that took almost 15 minutes. It was 400 Fuji GFX files. And I just wanted to see if the heat stays up. And the fan stayed pretty well full speed the whole time, but the CPUs really never varied. As I mentioned, it stays, as long as you're using all 8 cores, that 3.0 gigahertz is pretty standard. So it's a little deceiving that you're buying a 2.3 gigahertz MacBook Pro, and it sounds like it's going to be slower than the 2.9 one that came out last year. And will the other 2 cores actually make up for it? Little deceiving, because you're really buying a computer that's going to run at about the same clock speed as the one last year. It's really going to run for most things more in the 2.9 to 3.0 gigahertz range. As I said, these CPUs now, they change the speed based on the heat, and most of them run overclock most of the time. So bottom line is, I'm pretty happy with the change I made. It's one thing I think that I like that Apple does, and I know a lot of people criticize them for it, but I think that the one thing they've been real good about is when they can put a better CPU in a laptop. Typically what they do is they increase the power of the laptop and you get it for the same price. One thing that really means is if you really are thinking about a new laptop, well, the new 6-core MacBook Pro, which I don't have, and it has a slightly slower clock speed, but it would be interesting to see because I'm pretty sure it probably is as good or maybe better than the original 2018 one that came out. And if that's the case, it's now several $100s cheaper. So I've been really happy with that as a computer for the last 9 months. I work with iQ4 150 files. I work with iQ3 100 files. I do a lot of stitching of some of those files. I mean, I did a 7-shot pano stitch of an iQ4 150 file, and it was a little slow, but that's cranking a lot, and it's something I wouldn't even thought of doing a few years ago. So I think that the MacBook Pros are pretty good. I'm a little bit of an Apple fanboy. I've been using computers and software, even did a little computer coding clear back in the early 80s before the Mac had even been heard of. I've been using IBM and computers back then, and I've used Windows a little bit all along. So I hope I'm not sounding too Mac fanboy, but I really do like what Apple does. I like the way the software integrates with everything. And I think if you're considering a MacBook Pro, you might want to wait because there's rumors of a 16-inch version coming out. Now, it could be it's going to be a Pro machine and be more expensive, and it probably might still be a year out. So in my case, I always want to get the latest and greatest, although I do not think I'm sure that the new Mac Pro, when it comes out, if you put a lot of cores in that thing, it'll really crank. But, at what point is it, not worth it? I mean, that's going to be a lot of money. I'm guessing that by the time you really get a good machine with enough cores and RAM in that thing, you're probably looking at 10 grand and easily could shoot up to 25 or 30 grand if you really want to max it out. I think guys that are doing a lot of high-end video, especially 4K and even 8K video, especially if they're running multi-cam, a lot of it, it might be real helpful for them. I think as a still photographer and as a hobbyist videographer, I think it's just going to be overkill. Now, I might see one at Apple Store and just fall in love with it, because at first I thought they looked too much like the original cheese grater, but actually the design on is pretty cool, so I might buy one. Anyway, I hope I didn't bore anybody too much. If you like the channel, please hit the like button down below. I'm having a lot of fun making these. I'm kind of looking for things to do in my retirement nowadays, and these are kind of fun to make. Hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. And I've got one I'm working on now that'll be kind of cool, and I'm not going to really hint other than that, but just make sure you hit the notification bell, because it'll be out in the next couple of weeks, and it should be kind of a cool one. So anyway, thanks for watching.